One of the most common struggles we face when life takes an unexpected turn is the question, why is this happening to me? It's a fair question when the world feels like it's crumbling beneath our feet, when we're dealing with a loss, a betrayal, a closed door, or just pure silence from heaven. It's easy to believe that pain is random, cruel, or even personal. But what if I told you that pain, as unwelcome as it feels, might be carrying purpose, that it may be doing something in you, something that couldn't be done without it? Pain, in and of itself, is not pleasant. No one signs up for it. But pain has a way of reaching places in us that comfort never can. It peels away our illusions of control, strips down our pride, and makes us wrestle with our deepest assumptions about ourselves, about life, and most importantly, about God. We often assume that if God is good, then life should be smooth. But the deeper truth is that God is not interested in simply giving us comfort. He is committed to growing us into people of character, maturity, and spiritual depth. Let's think about that psychologically for a moment. Human beings do not grow in ease, they grow through tension. Resistance is the environment in which strength is born. It's like training a muscle. If there's no pressure, there's no progress. The same principle applies to the soul. The heart learns patience, resilience, and trust through difficulty, not despite it. In fact, some of the most emotionally grounded and spiritually deep people I've ever encountered are not those who had it easy, but those who suffered well, people who walked through fire and didn't come out bitter, but wiser, calmer, more anchored. What made them different wasn't their circumstance, it was their perspective. They chose to believe that the pain wasn't meaningless. They refused to let the hardship be wasted, and they allowed God to form something in them that ease never could. Now, I know how hard that is in the moment. It's one thing to talk about purpose in pain after the storm has passed. But what about when you're still in the middle of it? When your prayers feel unanswered? When people don't understand? And when your heart feels heavy every morning you wake up? That's when trusting God feels least logical, but most necessary. This is where a philosophical shift can help. Instead of viewing suffering as punishment or abandonment, what if we began to see it as a refining process? Not a fire sent to burn us, but to purify us. Throughout history, in every major faith tradition and even in secular philosophy, suffering has been seen as a teacher, a force that breaks down the superficial and introduces us to what is eternal. Even neurologically, the brain is wired to adapt to trauma by forming new connections, often leading to greater empathy, creativity, and strength. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once said, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. That meaning may not come overnight. But if you stay present, if you don't numb it, rush it, or avoid it, God can reveal it over time." It's important to understand that God does not delight in our pain. He is not distant or indifferent to our suffering. But He sees what we cannot. He sees the ripple effect. He sees the strength you'll need for what's coming next. He sees the people you'll one day encourage because you've walked through the valley yourself. And He knows that some lessons of the heart can only be learned in the dark. That's why trusting Him in difficult times is not about ignoring the pain. It's about believing there's something deeper taking place inside of it. It's about holding on to the truth that there is no suffering so deep that His purpose cannot reach deeper still. When you feel like everything is being stripped away, it might be that He's making room for something better to be built. Something that can withstand future storms, something eternal. So the next time you find yourself in the middle of something that feels unbearable, I invite you to ask a new question. Not, why is this happening to me? But, what is this shaping in me? That question alone can transform the way you experience suffering, from a roadblock to a revelation. And here's the truth to carry with you sometimes. The very pain you're trying to escape is the soil where your greatest growth is being planted. Trust the process. God is doing something in the deep, even if you can't yet see it. When life turns upside down, it's natural for our emotions to rise and take center stage. Fear, doubt, frustration, confusion, they come rushing in like a storm. And in those moments, it feels nearly impossible to trust God. Why? Because trust requires stability, and emotions are anything but stable. They shift with every conversation, every piece of news, every moment of silence from heaven. And if we're not careful, we begin to make decisions, form beliefs, and shape our identity based on how we feel instead of what we know. That's why one of the most important decisions we can make during difficult times is this: choose faith over feelings. Not because feelings don't matter, they do, but because they were never meant to lead. Emotions are excellent messengers, but terrible masters. They tell us what we're experiencing, but not always what's true. And if we allow them to drive the car, we'll end up in a ditch every time. Faith, on the other hand, asks us to hold to something deeper than our current state of mind. It demands we anchor ourselves not in how we feel, but in what we believe. That's not denial. It's discipline. It's choosing to ground our hearts in something more solid than a passing wave of emotion. Psychologically, this is what we call emotional regulation, the ability to observe your feelings without letting them override your core values or decisions. That skill is essential not only for spiritual growth, but for mental health. Without it, we're constantly reacting to life rather than responding to it with intention. Faith, then, becomes a kind of internal compass, a stabilizing force that keeps us pointed toward God even when the winds of circumstance are trying to blow us off course. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. When you're overwhelmed, when you're watching your plans collapse, when you're praying and hearing nothing in return, everything feels like it's falling apart. That's when faith becomes less of a feeling and more of a choice. A deliberate, quiet, sometimes trembling decision to say, God, I don't understand this, but I'm going to trust you anyway. And that kind of faith, it's powerful. It shifts something in the atmosphere. It allows peace to enter even in chaos. It reminds you that you are not defined by your circumstances and you are not alone in them. Now, from a philosophical standpoint, think about the nature of truth. Truth doesn't cease to be true just because we feel anxious or abandoned. The sun doesn't stop existing just because a cloud blocks it from view. In the same way, God's promises don't stop being real just because you can't feel them right now. Faith bridges that gap. It's the decision to trust what you know in your spirit over what you feel in the moment. That's why it's essential to fill your mind with truth even before the storm hits. Because when emotions are flooding in, you won't rise to the level of your feelings, you'll fall back to the level of your training. If your mind has been fed by fear, doubt, and negativity, that's what will rise to the surface. But if it's been nourished by truth, then even in crisis, something steady within you will remain. It's like standing in the ocean. Waves may crash against you, but if your feet are anchored in the sand, you won't be swept away. That's what faith does. It gives you roots, so that even when you're hurting, confused, or emotionally worn out, you can still say, God is still with me. He's still working, and I'm still His. This doesn't mean you won't feel doubt. It doesn't mean you won't cry or wrestle or ask questions. Faith isn't the absence of struggle. It's the decision to keep showing up in the struggle with your eyes on God. It's the refusal to let temporary feelings dictate eternal truths. You may be thinking, but what if I don't feel strong enough to make that choice? The good news is, you don't have to do it perfectly. Trusting God isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about surrendering it. You can bring your fears, your frustration, your sorrow to Him and still say, I trust you more than I trust myself. That's where real strength is found. In the surrender, in the choice to stand on truth even when everything else feels like sand. And here's the takeaway I want to leave you with: feelings are temporary passengers. Faith is the driver. Let truth lead, and your heart will eventually follow. One of the most effective ways to anchor your trust in God during difficult times is also one of the simplest. Remember what He's already done. In the middle of a crisis, when everything feels uncertain and your emotions are clouded, it becomes easy to forget. Forget the prayers that were answered. Forget the doors that opened. Forget the strength that came when you thought you couldn't take another step. It's human nature. When we're overwhelmed by what's happening now, we often lose sight of how far we've already come. But memory, when used intentionally, is a powerful spiritual and psychological tool. It's more than nostalgia. It's a strategy. Because when you actively recall God's past faithfulness, you reinforce your current confidence. You begin to see that the same God who carried you through before is still with you now. It shifts your mindset from panic to perspective. Psychologists call this retrieval-based resilience. In simple terms, it means drawing strength from past moments of endurance or breakthrough. Your mind literally pulls from memory banks to help you face what's ahead. It's the same principle used in therapy when people are guided to remember how they overcame previous hardship, not to deny their current pain, but to remind them that they are more capable, more supported, and more equipped than their present emotions suggest. Spiritually, the same principle holds. The Old Testament is filled with moments when God commands his people to remember, build altars, tell your children, mark the day, not because God needed the reminder, but because we do. And when we forget, fear takes over. That's what happened to the Israelites. God parted the Red Sea for them, and days later, they panicked over water in the desert. Why? Because they failed to remember. And when you don't remember, you start thinking that this time is different, that this problem is bigger, that this silence means God has left. But when you choose to remember, deliberately, consistently, you interrupt that cycle. You speak truth to your fear. You say, no, I've seen him work before. I've seen him make a way. I've seen his timing be better than mine. I don't have all the answers right now, but I know the one who does. And it doesn't have to be some grand, dramatic miracle to count. Sometimes remembering is as simple as looking back on a quiet strength that got you through a season you thought would break you. Sometimes it's remembering a conversation, a sense of peace, an unexpected provision, a message that came at just the right time. These moments are not coincidences. They are reminders of his presence. They are small anchors that keep you steady when the storm tries to drag you under. And here's where the philosophy deepens. When we practice remembering, we are actually practicing gratitude in its purest form. We're saying, I may not feel thankful for what's happening right now, but I am thankful for what God has already done. And that gives me faith for what he will do again. Gratitude and memory are intimately connected. One feeds the other. The more you remember, the more grateful you become. The more grateful you are, the easier it is to trust. This is why I encourage you to keep a record. Not just a mental note, but a physical one. A journal, a notebook, a running list of prayers answered, breakthroughs experienced, peace received in the chaos. Write down those moments when God came through, especially when you least expected it. Because later, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but sometime in the future, you're going to need to look back and remember. And in that moment, those written words will serve as fuel for your faith. There is power in your personal history with God. It's evidence, not theoretical, not secondhand, but real lived experience. And when doubt creeps in, as it inevitably will, evidence matters. It grounds you. It reminds you that your story is not just a sequence of random events, but a carefully woven narrative of grace, growth, and divine presence. So if today you're feeling lost or abandoned, take a moment and go back, not physically, but mentally, spiritually. Revisit that hospital room where you didn't know what would happen, and yet peace came. Revisit that night you cried out and something in your spirit shifted. Revisit the moment when the job came, the friend called, the burden lifted, the storm passed. That wasn't luck. That was God. And he hasn't changed. Because here's the truth. When you remember how God showed up before, it becomes much easier to trust that he's already working now, even if you can't yet see how. One of the hardest lessons in trusting God is also one of the most necessary, learning to let go. Not just of outcomes, but of the illusion that we're in control in the first place. You see, we often equate trust with understanding. We want to trust, but only if the path is clear, the timing is fast, and the result is guaranteed. But real trust, the kind that's forged in hardship, isn't about getting answers. It's about surrendering the need for them. That word, surrender, can be misunderstood. It doesn't mean giving up or being passive. It means releasing control of what you cannot command and choosing to rest in something, or rather someone, bigger than yourself. Surrender is active. It takes courage. It's a conscious choice to say, God, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I trust that you do. And that's enough for now. There's a deep psychological connection here. Human beings are hardwired for certainty. Our brains crave predictability because it gives us a sense of safety. That's why waiting is so uncomfortable. Uncertainty creates tension in the mind, which then leaks into the heart. But spiritual maturity grows in that very space, in the tension between not knowing and still believing. Philosophers call this the fertile void, a space where all possibilities exist but none have fully formed yet. It's frustrating, yes, but it's also fertile. It's the ground where faith takes root and trust begins to deepen. That's why God often works through waiting. He's not just orchestrating events outside of us, He's shaping something inside us. And sometimes the work He's doing in you is more important than the outcome you're praying for. When things aren't moving at your pace, it doesn't mean He's forgotten you. It means He's building something that requires more time than your timeline allows. Now, think about it. If you had full control over everything in your life, how much would you really need to trust God? The very need for trust implies not having control. That's the paradox. And here's the deeper truth: the more you surrender, the more peace you'll have. Because peace doesn't come from knowing what will happen. It comes from knowing who holds it all. When we try to control every variable, fix every outcome, and force every solution, we exhaust ourselves. And often, we delay the very breakthrough we're praying for. Surrender isn't about inactivity, it's about alignment. It's saying, I will act in faith, I will move with integrity, but I will not try to force what only God can finish. There's a psychological release that comes when we stop grasping. Control creates tension. Surrender creates space for clarity, for wisdom, for divine intervention. And it doesn't mean we lose our ambition or our desire for change. It means we release our grip on how and when it happens. That's maturity. That's trust. Philosophically, there's a principle at play here that many miss. Surrender requires humility. Not the kind of humility that makes you think less of yourself, but the kind that reminds you that you are not the center of the universe. You are not the sole architect of your destiny. You are a participant in a story being written by someone far wiser than you. And that perspective is liberating. It frees you from the crushing burden of having to make everything work on your own. God's timing, in particular, is one of the greatest tests of our faith. We want now. He says, wait. We want visible progress. He says, be still. And yet, again and again, when we look back, we see that His timing wasn't just better. It was perfect. Not always comfortable, but always purposeful. So here's a practical way to live this out. Every time you find yourself worrying about the outcome, pause and ask, what part of this do I truly control? Most often, the answer is very little. But what you can control is your response, your attitude, your posture. You can choose peace over panic, trust over tension, and rest over striving. There is power in that kind of surrender. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the kind of surrender that says, I may not have the plan, but I know the one who does, and I'll trust His process more than my pressure. And here's the truth you can take with you: letting go is not losing. It's making room. When you surrender control, you open the door for God to do what only He can.